Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Digital Law News. So this is episode 31. I'm joined by my colleague here today, Peter, and we're just going to be running through some of this week's news stories that have come up that are in relation to our line of work. So just for those who don't know, Digital Law is a niche law firm based in Barnsley in the UK. And we specialise in all things to do with data protection, technology matters, social media law, and cyber law as well. So I'll just pass over to Peter just to give himself a little introduction before we get started.
Thanks, Laura, and hello, everyone. Yeah, it's been a busy week, so we've got quite a few news stories to update you with, some of which have actually almost been on the virtual front pages indeed this week. So there's plenty to talk about, and it ties in neatly with our area of specialism, where I'm always advising on everything from e-commerce to social media, and increasingly some of the competition issues we talk about, everything from the EU Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, through to the regulation and operation of platforms in the UK and the EU and further afield as well.
Great, thanks. So we'll kick off with today's first story then. So this is basically millions of people's data is at risk, says Amazon insiders as they sound alarm over security. So basically there's been some whistleblowers inside of Amazon, and they were past or previous employees of Amazon. They've noticed some security issues whilst working for the company. And they've tried to raise this with some of the senior staff there. So they've raised this issue in regards to basically people's data not being safe and possibly being exposed to potential breaches, theft and exploitation and compliance issues as well. So basically they've raised this with senior staff, and they've kind of been sidelined and pushed out the company as a way of kind of shutting them up rather than coming out and raising the issues. So yeah, pass over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Laura. I mean, this is a big story, and I think a fairly terrifying one. I think during the pandemic over the last year, we've all come to rely on Amazon that little bit more. If it's from using their smart speakers to be a source of information, through to doing deliveries for things that we would otherwise have been getting from shops that have been shut. And when you then find out that all of that increased volume of personal data that they've been receiving is potentially at risk, it really does send a shiver, I think, down. Anyone who's ever ordered anything online is going to be thinking, well, that's a bit of a concern, because of course if you've ordered it, that includes not just your home delivery address, but potentially your payment information. And let's be honest as well, if you've been buying a lot of things from Amazon, they could work out quite a bit about you when you're home, so you can take deliveries, and when you're away, they could work out the sorts of thing, anything from if you've been ordering medical equipment or things to deal with medical and health issues, or if you've been ordering things that are involved in the practice of religion. There's an awful lot of things that you can discern from a detailed Amazon shopping list, and to find that information isn't necessarily private between you and the retailer is a concern. And I think we also have to think about the implication here when it comes to global e-commerce and global trade. We've got a global platform here, originally coming from the US, which has very different data protection laws compared certainly to the EU and certainly compared to the rest of the world. And these platforms have then always made efforts to say, well, okay, we'll jump through the hoops to satisfy from a regulatory compliance perspective what the regulators are looking for in Europe when it comes to privacy, when it comes to data protection. And of course, that's all around to prevent this, to make sure that people's data is safe and secure. So when you then find that there have been issues like this, and whistleblowers have been closed down and removed from the organization, that then raises questions about clear reporting, transparency, corporate governance there. And then it also makes you worry about, well, if that's been the approach, are they truly demonstrating compliance with all of the varying levels of privacy and data protection law around the world. And this could be the tip of an iceberg. The story's come out. Let's now see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, a key principle of GDPR is making sure that you're reporting any data breaches, and clearly there's been issues like this that has been raised. You'd think that they would want to know that they've got like insecurities with the system rather than trying to cover it up. You'd think that they'd want to try and fix it. Yeah.
And the scary thing is that there are hackers out there who have probably, if these people are identifying where there are potential risks, I'm sure there are hackers out there that have already been, exfiltrating information and carrying out attacks. And regrettably, we'll probably only properly find out the details of it once it's all over and the damage has been done.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to our next story for today then. So this is in regards to Australia's controversial media code that targets Google and Facebook, which is now law. So this is a story that we've been speaking about for the last couple of weeks. It was in regards to Australia's new law that they're bringing in regards to charging Google and Facebook, and basically making it law for them having to pay for the new services that they're putting on their website. So we have spoke about this previously, like I mentioned. I think when we mentioned it last, Australia had been banned from seeing certain posts on Facebook, even though the law hadn't been brought in yet. But now it has, and I think there has been some more updates in terms of Facebook's view on this. If you want to just explain that a bit more, Peter.
Yeah, so it was interesting when we last looked at this story, and this is now, I think, the third week we've looked at it.
Yeah.
The story was that Facebook had sort of pulled the shutters down and was denying the Australian government access to Facebook in effect. So not only was news not being shared, but they were also stopping the Australian government from sharing information about the pandemic, about vaccines, and various other sort of government communications channels were being limited. And that's where we were last Friday. But then by the start of the week, it turned out there'd been a climb down. And I don't think it was the climb down that we expected. I think an awful lot of people thought, well, Mark Zuckerberg is emperor of Facebook. It is his domain. He has built it. If he wants to vary his terms and run it the way he wishes, then I'm sure he'll carry on. But in fact, no. He ended up allowing, giving the Australian government back their communications channels. And he has now signed deals with Australian media companies so that they can then share Australian news media on Facebook. I think this is largely due to the fact that there's a bit of a domino effect where after Australia was treated this way, several other countries, notably Canada, turned around and said, well, we stand with Australia on this. Questions are asked in the UK Parliament about Facebook's conduct. There was widespread trending on Twitter of people in Australia saying, take the app off, stop using it, boycott Facebook. And I think because it was generally seen as a bit of a PR disaster, they decided to relent and have decided instead to pay the news content creators. And yeah, I think, it's funny, I was talking over the weekend with a programmer who, his view was, look, Zuckerberg built Facebook from scratch. It's his domain. Why should he suddenly change this? So he was totally, he really didn't understand the point of view of wanting to pay the news content creators. But by the same token, this is someone who's so paranoid they don't have a Facebook account themselves. So I don't think he really understood the way that a lot of people do rely on Facebook for their news and to receive this. So and why it's such a big deal. It's also the fact that we have to look at the fact that Facebook turned over something like $36 billion in the last financial year. It's probably turned over even more during this year of pandemic when people have been living their lives vicariously through. And therefore, when it's getting such a massive amount of the advertising revenue that used to go to the newspapers, used to go to the mass market media, that to a certain extent, it seems fair to say that those content creators should therefore get paid for the fact that it is their content, their stories that are being shared. But the implications of this are now, well, what will happen elsewhere? And there's talk of amendments being made to the draft EU Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act. This is the new legislation that would govern in the EU single market how platforms like Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon are regulated in their role as gatekeepers. And also the UK Competition and Markets Authority has been looking at what happened in Australia quite keenly as well, as have regulators in other countries, notably Canada. So this could now be a bit of a domino effect, and it's a really important principle here that these content creators could potentially now be paid. And I think it's also important to bear in mind that Google had actually split with Facebook and had themselves signed bilateral deals with some of the news organisations like Fox and others in Australia before Facebook took this action several weeks before. So therefore, let's see. Australia has now been the test case. Australia has shown what can be done. Interestingly, from a political point of view, Scott Morrison, who is the Australian Prime Minister, was in not the best political situation. If we think over the last Australian summer, so winter in the Northern Hemisphere, there were the forest fires. He was criticised for the response because he'd gone away on holiday, and then when he went to some of the areas that had been hit, there were people that were heckling him. Yet, because he's been seen to stand up to Facebook, and because he's also been seen to stand up to China and some of their very aggressive practices on trade this year, apparently his poll ratings are now skyrocketing. So the fact that he's been seen to take on Facebook and win, I think has also been an interesting object lesson, and it'll be interesting to see that other world leaders therefore pick a fight with Facebook as well, just so that they can get a bit of a poll boost from it. That is a bit cynical, I admit, but painful experience in recent years suggests it might happen. So again, let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, this is an interesting one to follow, especially, like you said, it might come into the EU as well as the UK as well. But I know you mentioned earlier today when we were speaking about this, how Facebook are potentially opening a head office in the UK, and then that might have an impact on this.
It might. So you might find that you know, for example, the UK Competition and Markets Authority might puff up its chest, or you might get a report from the UK Digital DCMS committee might turn around and say a few unkind things about Facebook. But I think there have been significant tax breaks to a certain extent given to Facebook, so they can get a nice London European HQ, which has been planned for a number of years. And it'll be interesting to see how firm the government wishes to take this action, because they might look and think, if we actually end up having a big multinational organisation that was saying, yes, we will have our HQ in London, they might be quite keen to hold on to that in order to have a positive story with regards to Brexit and the continuing preeminence of London as a global commercial and financial centre. Yeah,
absolutely. So moving on to the next story of today then. So this is quite a scary one in some ways. So this is basically parents have been alerted by Nursery Cam of a security breach. So this is a webcam system that is basically placed in nurseries while children are at school there, and it basically allows parents to drop in and see their children like playing and learning, and basically just watch them while they're away from home. So the school in which this has been in place have then actually written to the families and told them about a data breach. And the data breach involved the username and passwords, the email addresses and the names of the parents who have been viewing the accounts. So since then, they have suspended their service and they have notified the ICO, as well as saying that the loophole was in fact breached by somebody who wasn't trying to watch anything that's going on, but try and highlight the fact that it is not a very secure system. So even though there has been breached, basically they're trying to dull it down a little bit. But yeah, the good thing is that they've reported it to the ICO, and hopefully they then do go on and then fix their security issues.
Indeed. I suppose a good starting point, I think, to this story is actually to compare it with some of the other children's toys that have been found from a digital perspective to be horrific with regards to their security. So if anyone's interested on this, do a quick Google for My Friend Kayla. That's Kayla with a C, C-A-Y-L-A. If you then on Google click on videos, you should then get a video of a friend of mine, Mr. Finn Mustad, who is based in Norway, and he did a great expose on how easily the Kayla doll could be hacked because its Bluetooth was so easy to hack. And as a result, this doll is no longer for sale in the European Union. The only one of the model left is in the East Berlin Spying Museum, which says it all, really. So moving on, when we then find technology like this with the name Nursery Cam, obviously it's going to be involved in taking images of people's young children. And then when we find the potential security vulnerability there, I think any parent is going to sort of have their heart in their mouth thinking, oh, goodness me. Now, at least we aren't looking at images here, but what we are looking at, I mean, even though it was the information of the parents that was in there, that's still enough, because then that's basically a list to say, hello, we're parents and we have young children. So they could still be targeted by hackers, and let's just not go down that avenue in terms of why they could possibly be targeted. But the point is that I think parents very often expect to have sort of bulletproof levels of security on a system like this. And when you suddenly find that there are vulnerabilities, it is therefore a cause for concern. It's great that Nursery Cam have taken this very, very seriously. They have reported it to the regulator. At least the hacker appears to have had almost a sort of ethical element insofar as they wanted to highlight this vulnerability and bring it to Nursery Cam's attention, so they do something about it to make sure that this data is not then exploited, falls into the wrong hands. But I think it is a bit of a cautionary tale with regards to the increasing digitization of our lives. When we've got all these smart devices in our homes, everything from the smart vacuum cleaners to the smart toasters and the smart fridges, all of this technology has a potential to be hacked. All of this could be recording rather sensitive personal private information. Before Christmas, I think it was, we talked about the vacuum cleaner that can be hacked, and even though there's no microphone on the vacuum cleaner, guess what? There's the hardware on there is recording sound waves, so it doesn't crash into furniture, and then the hackers can reconstruct an audio recording from that. This is even worse, because obviously we've got technology where it could be taking audio and video recording of young children, and we would want that information to be absolutely safe under lock and key, and I think it's a concern when it isn't. So I think the takeaway from this, Nursery Cam, even though they'll get bad PR from this, actually appear to be doing everything they can to make their platform more secure. But as a general warning to all the parents out there, do not presume that new electronic toy that you have had, sitting under the Christmas tree and then given to your children, do not presume that just because it is a digital toy marketed at children means it has good levels of security on there. So if it's anything from a smart teddy bear that the children can go online with, through to some of the educational toys that are targeted at very young children, do not, and also smartwatches, I should add, some of the digital smartwatches and things that are designed for children, do not presume that the security on there is good. Always check it. And if you're ever in any doubt, then I'm afraid just stop using it. Is probably better if you have those concerns. But I think particularly for those living in cities, when you're on busy digital networks where you might have such a toy or product on your home network, you're always going to have a concern that someone else could get into that network quite easily because of the population density. So I think this is a cautionary tale and a reminder of the need to check security settings for those who are in this sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Check and then double check again.
Exactly, and I think also, bearing in mind this is this is technology that could be used by nurseries and those engaged in childcare. As we come out of lockdown, and parents are going to be having to sometimes work long hours as they go back into their jobs. they could be very reliant on nurseries to provide that childcare, and nurseries themselves need to be thinking, what kit are we using? What equipment have we got? Is it secure? So I think it's an ongoing requirement on nurseries to think very carefully about the sort of technology that they're using as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is just a reminder that we always say to our clients, if you are using an outsourced supplier or anything for any reason, whether that's for cloud storage or simply like something like MailChimp to send emails or anything like that, always check the privacy policy and the terms and conditions for the security, and making sure that they've got all the information that you'd expect to see in their privacy policy, because if they're not being open about it, it's likely that these security things are not in place.
Exactly.
Yeah. So moving on to our next story then. So this is in regards to a dating app scam that was committed by a criminal from inside prison. So this was a story, I think, on the BBC, and it was about a man who was called Jamie, which wasn't his real name, who is in his early 20s and has been making money for the past few years whilst he was in prison by scamming women, usually those who are older than him, who are looking to fall in love. And basically he's been going on to dating websites, trying to find people who are more vulnerable than him, and then basically using tactics to make them fall in love with him and then ask them for money. So he's using this as a way to commit fraud whilst he's in prison on an illegal phone. And since coming out of prison and not facing any consequences for his actions to do with these frauds, he's then come forward and spoke to the BBC about this in order to raise awareness and kind of make a good out of what he's done in terms of raising awareness and basically making sure that other people don't fall for the things that he has been doing.
Indeed, and I think the scary thing here is that if this chap hadn't come forward and told his story of how he'd extorted on one occasion up to £10,000 over quite a long period of time, by the sound of it, from one of his victims, if he hadn't come forward, I don't think we would have heard about this. And that's the scary thing. Now, our firm has been instructed by clients in the past who've been in similar situations where they've struck up online relationships, and when we've started to look at it, we've done the Google image search and we found out that the person they were talking to, that isn't their photo. We've gone and found a genuine profile that photo has been taken from, or indeed on one occasion it turned out it was a minor European politician whose photo was being used, and our client thought they were having this relationship with an oil executive when in fact it was a German MEP, and then sometimes you find out that you think that the person's in one particular area, and then we've done an IP search and found out that the person's in a totally different country from what the poor victim thinks. And I think the key thing here is right what you said at the start, Laura, where this individual and individuals like him prey on vulnerable people. They do the research to find people that might be living on their own, who might have been on their own for quite some time and might be, you can imagine in the pandemic right now, living on your own, global pandemic, starved of human company. This guy tries to then prey on that vulnerability by seeming very nice, and apparently he used his own photos. He was confident enough of his own looks that he could appeal to people and then encourage them to say, oh, I'm struggling. There's usually some bleeding heart story sort of thing where they basically turn around and say, oh, I'm going to be evicted, I've lost my job, or I need this and I need that, and they start sending cash payments. One of the clients that we helped, this guy, even though he said he was an oil executive, was like, oh, our company's struggling and we need money so we can carry on with the oil exploration, and will you invest? And he'd provide fake stock transfer forms and share certificates. And our expert took one look and was able to work out, well, these are not genuine. This is worthless. You've not invested in anything. You've just been scammed. But the problem is, once you've got to the point mentally where you want to believe in this person and you want to start sending them money, it is no one wants to turn around and find they've been made a fool of.
No.
So these poor people are victims of crime, they're victims of fraud. Very often they are so embarrassed after this guy fleeces them and then blocks them on whatever media channel they've been using to communicate. They simply wouldn't want to go forward. Who wants to go along to the police and say, I've been scammed by one of these ruthless individuals and I've paid hundreds, if not thousands of pounds? And you're going to be concerned that the police are just going to turn around and laugh you out of the office. And
Yeah.
given the difficulties that we found when action fraud was themselves had an insider ended up taking footage to show how action fraud people had just sat there not really listening, entering a few things onto the system and giving out crime reference numbers like Smarties. It doesn't really give people the confidence to report fraud either. So
No.
the terrible thing here is that this guy's getting away with it, and hundreds of these awful people are out there getting away with it too. And I think all we can do really is spread awareness. And if you hear of a friend or relative that potentially is saying, oh, I've met someone online, oh, it's going really well, ask questions, show the interest. Have they met them in person? Are they sending them money? And if you do find out that this is going on, be sympathetic. Say, this happens to a lot of people. But I think it's still important to try and report it, because hopefully, if action fraud or the police get enough crime references, they might then get enough evidence to be able to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of links on to the last story that we're going to be talking about. But we will come back to that, with just saying about action fraud and how fraud and online scams are becoming ever so more popular, and it's kind of coming like an epidemic in the UK, and there's people now saying that there needs to be more government funding, which I completely agree with that. But yeah, we will come back to that when we talk about our final story. So moving on to our next one then. So this is in regards to a law firm that has suffered a hack and their data has been stolen. So this is of a global law firm, Jones Day, and they've reported that 100 gigabytes of data has been stolen, with some of it appearing on the dark web after a third party provides it with a file transfer software. That software has been hacked. So the firm has been had some very high profile cases recently. So they've been acting on behalf of Donald Trump in last November's election. So some of the screenshots of documents that they've been working on have ended up on the dark web. And I think the one most important thing here is to show the difference between data protection in the US and data protection in the UK and other states. So basically showing that if such thing was happening in the UK, we would report this straight away. Whereas in the US, they're just trying to cover it up, and I don't think them themselves had reported this issue. So yeah.
Yes, I thought this was an interesting story. If for nothing else, the fact that this law firm, when the story was reported on Legal Futures, of course, it was accompanied by a massive picture of Donald Trump's head on the byline. So you could imagine why they wanted to do that. I mean, at this point, it's not really saying much about the fact, oh, this firm acted for Donald Trump, because so many US law firms have acted for Donald Trump in different states on election matters. But I think also it's then many of them have stopped working for him as well in fairly short order. Indeed, I think it might be a matter of which US firms haven't acted for Donald Trump might be a few of them at this rate. But the point here is that they've acted for a number of high-profile individuals and organisations, and then a third-party supplier has been hacked and their client information has been compromised. And then, as you say, Laura, it's the different approach here. So this is a large global firm with offices in multiple different jurisdictions. But of course, the approach in the US is that if you have a serious data protection breach, I think the first response very often is, can we avoid telling anyone about it? And very often US organizations only do reveal that they've had a data protection breach if they are then under requirements to actually have to tell the markets about it. So if they're, for example, a publicly traded firm, as Target was when they had to make their statement. They had to say, look, we have been hacked, and they had to then publish the facts to avoid any investigation from the Securities and Exchange Commission. But if you are publicly traded, very often the response is, well, can we just hush this up and not have to tell anyone? Whereas, as you quite rightly say, in the UK and the EU, you're under an obligation to report it if data subjects are going to be affected. And if you're looking at, individuals who are clients of law firms, if their information is compromised, yeah, those data subjects are going to be affected, virtually by definition. So you have to report it. But it just shows sometimes that if you're in a large multinational, there will be varying degrees of compliance depending on which jurisdiction they're in. So even though this organisation has offices in the UK and the EU, because this was in the US and it was a US supplier, then they're not going to turn around and report it to EU regulators for that very reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just showing that even though they are a global law firm, obviously they're having probably got like binding corporate rules in place, so they should be reporting this. But obviously they haven't. But it'd be interesting if they do then come out with a statement or anything in regards to this to further comment on it.
Indeed, I think the level of press coverage dictates that they probably will, because sometimes it's just the optics on it. Okay, we don't have to report it, but actually our silence looks actually worse and might mean that our clients might lose faith in us. So sometimes it's where you get, the rock versus immovable object. Law firms might say, well, we don't want to have to talk about this. We don't legally have to do it. But sometimes just because you legally don't have to do something doesn't mean that you shouldn't. If the story certainly it's going through the legal specialist press. Well, what if it suddenly ends up on the front of Mail Online, the world's most popular news website? That's when you've got a PR problem, and that sometimes becomes the more pressing concern. So it will be a tricky one for them, but I think it illustrates those varying levels of compliance when it comes to different data protection standards around the world and how they end up being applied to multinationals. And as you say, Laura, there's the issue on binding corporate rules that may or may not be in play here, and I think it also actually potentially would call such rules into the integrity of them into question if say a large multinational organization with binding corporate rules that was regulated by a data protection supervisor in an EU country, if that supervisor found out there had been a major breach and that EU data subject data had been compromised, I think they would expect under those BCRs that it would have been reported to them. If it hasn't, that then brings the integrity of those BCRs into question, including if the BCRs don't actually include that requirement or don't have that requirement in terms of how the firm has chosen to comply with its own rules, if you follow.
Yeah, thanks. So moving on to our last story for today then. So this is in regards to sneaky cyber crooks attacking victims, but instead of stealing large sums of money, they're stealing smaller sums of cash to avoid detection. So this was a report carried out, and cyber criminals are going around and stealing as little as like £5 at a time, but targeting hundreds of thousands of accounts at the same time. So this has been referred to as silent stealing, and the hope is that people potentially see that their money has gone missing, potentially report it to the bank, but that's kind of as far as it goes. It doesn't then go on to like a fraud investigation or anything. So the criminals are less likely to get found out and less likely to then basically lose this money that they have stolen off people. So this just then highlights the issue that we spoke about 5 minutes ago about the UK reaching epidemic levels of fraud, and it's been estimated that fraud is causing the UK a loss of £190 billion a year now. So basically, people who carried out this report are saying that the government needs to take action about it and have specific teams to deal with fraud and specific funding to help reduce this level, because it is kind of getting out of control.
It is, and I mean, I think when the figures are so large like that, it's difficult to put it in perspective. But if we just think that the UK government has spent 300 billion on coronavirus and related support programs during the course of the last year, so everything from test and trace to the furlough schemes to the vaccines to putting more money into the NHS, all of that related expenditure came to 300 billion.
Yeah.
And we're looking at 190 billion here being lost to the UK economy through fraud. And the fact here that we're talking about these small transactions, it's the fact that it could be going out, you know, metaphorically from your wallet and you wouldn't even notice. And I mean, Laura, we were talking about this earlier, and we were talking about the fact that very often people don't necessarily scrutinise their bank statements to pick up on this sort of stuff. So you could quite easily miss it in your regular statement. Yeah,
absolutely. I think as well, when some people are now looking at the banking app, a lot of people obviously do online banking a lot more regular, and they don't necessarily look at the ingoings, the outgoings. They just kind of look at the amount that's in their bank. And when you're spending such little amounts, when you're going shopping and things like that, an extra £10 probably isn't going to go unmissed by a lot of people. Like, some people may realise that the £10 has gone missing, but probably won't think much about it. If it is, say, labelled and it's come out of the bank as something that looks genuine, which they could do, like label it in a way that makes it look genuine, people probably wouldn't even look into it. And all it takes is for people to do this a lot, and it could be done to the same amount of people, and eventually they've lost a lot of money.
Exactly. So it's the importance of actually checking your bank statements and not just you know, putting them to one side or filing them in the circular filing cabinet. It's a matter of actually making sure that you do try and get into the habit of going through them, just to spot it. Because the interesting thing is that this isn't the first time that fraudsters have done this. I mean, I remember seeing about an app a few years ago where I think there was an app developer in France who was convicted because he developed an app that, you know, I think the app was for a game or something, but the idea was that people would install this thing on their phone, and then it would basically take a couple of cents off the euro in every single transaction, and then it would funnel that money away to the developer. And he'd made hundreds of thousands of euro before the police caught up with him. But it was preying on the fact that people would sort of be making online in-app purchases for different things through their mobile device, as well as ordering things. And just the idea that, this could just, you know, skim a few cents off each transaction and no one would notice. And this is sort of taking that same idea. Can we just, you know, skim a few pounds here, a few euros there, and hope that no one notices that it's actually happened before it's gone? And then by the time you do notice, you go, oh, it was only for £5. Oh, it was only for £10. But I think the way to think about it is think, well, hang on. If I'd not been scammed and lost my £5 or £10 there, I could have done what I wanted with that. Okay, you may have spent that, you know, well, I was going to say going for a beer or something. You can't even do that at the moment. But the point is that, you know, you might have thought, well, if I knew I had that £10 in my pocket each month, I could have given that to a charity of my choice who could benefit from it, rather than it going to the fraudster's pocket, I think is the point. So we want to control what we do with our money. We work hard enough to get it. So it is a pity if fraudsters are highlighting the fact that everyone is, you know, very, very busy, someone doesn't have the time to go through their statements. They're preying on that to try and then defraud us. And so sometimes it's not just the big ticket stuff, it's the small stuff here that could really hurt over a long period of time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the thing, that this is going unnoticed, and it's good that we can then speak about this. And there's actually articles about this bringing to people's attention, because a lot of it would go unnoticed, and it kind of highlights the risk of things like this as well.
Exactly.
So that's everything we've got time for today. So we just wanted to remind you of our GDPR compliance manual for legal practices. So this is still on sale for £99, available in both hard copy and digital copy as well. So this is made up of templates, forms and checklists and basically just a guide of how you can become GDPR compliant in your firm, or even we've had people purchase this from other sectors as well, Peter, if you just want to give a bit more information.
Yeah, so this manual contains forms and templates and checklists to help you to get a real handle on your GDPR compliance, to help you demonstrate compliance, to embed it through your organisation, and hopefully reduce the possibility of you being on the receiving end of some of the data protection breaches and cyber attacks that we've talked about this week. If you're interested in being able to get that, we do it. You can either get the electronic version there or the good old hard copy. Yeah. They can't hack it if it's on hard copy, can they? So hence you can get the hard copy there if you wish, the binder, and use that as a way to kickstart your efforts to comply. So if you're in that sort of compliance function or data protection function in your organisation, we've had people from accounting to financial services to insurance who've taken a look at this manual and they found it helpful in their organisations. So it may be useful for whatever sector you happen to be in. And also, while we're on it, Laura, we might as well just tell the listeners about the Law Tech Legal Hackathon that concluded yesterday, and I think we're going to be having a recording of that session available on certain channels as well, so that we could put the link into the show notes for today. And also, I'm sure they'll be able to find it on the Anson Evaluate social media as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give people a little bit more information about that, Anson Evaluate, who is a co-producer of this webinar as well, they've worked with Tonic Workflows and the Sheffield Legal Hackers, which I'm a committee member for, to put together a free doc-assemble showcase in order to help those with access to justice issues regarding asylum, revenge porn, domestic violence as well, and basically just find a solution to some of those issues, and basically reduce the issues to do with access to justice. So that showcase took place yesterday, and that will be going up on the Anson Evaluate social media and the Sheffield Legal Hackers social media as well, probably within the next couple of days. So once that is up, I will add that onto our website in the podcast notes as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Laura. And it's there's the those systems were made using the Python coding language, and as you say on DocAssemble, quite intuitive technology to use. It was still very confusing for me because it's all coding, and but the great thing about this was it was other law students who were working on this that we engaged with around the country, and just fascinating to see what they're able to put together. And you think, well, if that's the possibility there, it just opens out the possibilities of what can be done by firms and startups when it comes to tackling issues around access to justice and making justice more accessible for all, ultimately. So I hope everyone enjoys the opportunity to potentially take a look at that if they get some time over the course of the coming weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you once again for everyone for listening today, and thank you for Anson Evaluate for helping us produce this webinar. So this recording will be available on our website, on our YouTube channel, and our podcast channels, like it usually is. So thank you once again, and we hope to see everyone again next week.